Hello, welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. Hey, I'm Alex Williams with the New Stack, and we're here at DockerCon in Austin, Texas.
Fun and funky Austin, Texas. And we got a whole bunch of podcasts this week that we're going to be presenting to you.
And since we're in Austin, the music capital. Great to be here as always.
Yes.
Hey, it's Alex Williams with the New Stack here at DockerCon in Austin with Brian Gracely of Red Hat. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Alex.
So you sat in on the keynote today.
Yeah.
And so how would you sum it up? What were some of the themes that you heard come out of the keynote?
I think there was a couple things that were really important. One of them, obviously, is the importance of security. So Docker's trying really hard to make security easier, embedded into systems. I think Red Hat has been, a huge champion of that for a long time, is that you have to embed it in a lot of places. It's not something you want to bolt on later. So that was really important. They were talking about how customers want to leverage multiple clouds, I might use my data center, but I might use Amazon, I might use Azure. I think we hear that all the time from companies, is that that's a trend they want to get into, and they want platforms or scheduling, orchestration, whatever layer you want to make out of that, sort of make that agnostic or make that abstracted. So that was really important. And then obviously, they reinforced this idea that containers and Linux are, sort of simpatico, and you can't have one without the other. And so we were very pleased with the keynote, not only from the perspective of the container community is still really robust, more people are here than were last year, but just, the fact that containers are becoming a more mainstream technology for enterprises.
Yeah, they really are, aren't they?
Yep.
And so the security story then makes sense then, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, we've, at least from an OpenShift perspective, we've always enhanced what we did around Kubernetes. So Kubernetes does some things very well. We've always made sure that any traffic within the platform is always secured. It's always encrypted. There's always things that people want us to do a little bit more from. But I think their premise that you need to be secure, it needs to be encrypted because you're going to go across multiple clouds and your boundaries kind of go away is really important.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So with that, we also saw, you're also mentioning, some of the other things that came out of the keynote. In particular, there was this discussion about Moby.
Yep.
And Moby, it sounds like, and we were talking beforehand, you described it as almost like their community edition.
Right.
Right.
Right. So I think the simplest way to take it is when you had Docker Inc., so Solomon and Ben, and you had the open source project called Docker, there was some confusion of people of, where does one stop and where does the other, and Solomon highlighted it. He said, look, you may not always agree with what we want to do. This is going to help do that. So Moby, in the simplest terms, is the renaming of the old open source Docker project that, has the massive community around it, tons of contributors. And so from a Red Hat perspective, it just simply means that the Docker bits that we've always shipped with RHEL will now just be called Moby. And customers can still, get containers from the operating system that they want to use.
So what would you think are some of the differences you see between this Docker and the Docker of last year, the DockerCon of this year compared to the DockerCon of last year?
I think the biggest thing to me, and I think they sort of called it out, is you've got a broader set of customers who now trust containers, and you've got people that are comfortable with a broader set of use cases using containers. So, for a while it was always, it's only microservices, it's only cloud native. And I think what we see is people say, look, this application runs perfectly fine on RHEL, on Linux. Why can't it run in a container? And they've been pushing that envelope. I mean, we see people doing everything from, databases to web services to caching to even things like legacy middleware that they've been trying to put into containers, because there's, it comes automated, it's embedded in Linux, so you get all the security tools with it, and then you get the platform stuff like Kubernetes that's going to help scale it.
So if you look at it, then, from that perspective, right, in terms of how companies are thinking about, using container technologies, a lot of it, and when you talk about security, gets into like issues around the networking, right, and the storage.
Right.
What is the take on that from your point of view right now? And it seems like there's more discussion about it.
Yeah, I think so. So separate the two out. So from a networking perspective, that's getting fairly stabilized. I mean, at least you've got standard interfaces like Kubernetes has CNI and Docker has CNI, so that's great. Lots of network companies plug into that. The challenge on the network side is just getting network people who for decades have used hardware to now think in terms of software and automatically getting an IP address and all that. But so that's getting pretty good. The storage piece, we're now seeing more and more storage companies or storage technologies that are kind of getting container aware. And that's the harder piece because you don't want your data to go away. And so you have to do some things around containers to make sure that they're more than just a potentially killable Linux process.
Right.
But that's a space that's evolved a lot in the last year. I mean, we just announced some integration with NetApp. EMC, Dell EMC just became a platinum partner of the CNCF, so they're obviously all in. You see a lot of little startups that are coming in, Portworx and a lot of others. Red Hat's got what we now call container native storage, which is some of the things we've done with Ceph and Gluster. Look, the simplest way to think about that is the reason those things are important is because enterprise customers are saying, I want to run more than stateless applications on there. And so storage and networking becomes top of mind.
How about the database story that's emerging out of this? What's your take on that? I mean, we're starting to, the database, question I think is always an interesting one because, if you're talking about databases that are distributed across multiple infrastructures, that becomes a complexity that is pretty difficult.
So I think there's a couple of ways people are trying to address it. One of them is some of the databases that aren't sort of like super complex clustering, so just basic SQL databases, and like those work fine in containers as is. If you, like just as an example, if you go out to Docker Hub, for example, and look at the most popular things downloaded, I mean, it's SQL, Postgres, Redis, so people are using them there. Where it gets a little more interesting is where should you do database clustering? Should things like Kubernetes become more aware of that as a use case and kind of build services to and we see that with stateful sets. That's one of those things that's making progress. The other thing that we see is people go, what if I don't want to think about it as a database? I want to think about it as a data service. So like machine learning or something. And that's where we're spending a lot of time around the Open Service Broker API, the work that CNCF and Cloud Foundry Foundation or Chip Childress is working on. We're doing a lot of contributions. Deis is working on. So, you've got some easy database problems to solve. You've got some of the clustering stuff which still needs some work, but things like Kubernetes or stateful sets are trying to address it. And then you've got the how do I integrate a third-party service, and we feel like that service broker model is fairly good.
Interesting. So that service broker model will really emerge, I think, in the next year or so, won't it?
Right. So,
well, that's great. Well, Brian, thanks for just taking a few minutes. I just wanted to chat for a minute and get a recap. So thank you very much.
Yeah, always great to catch up, and love working with you guys.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, it's Alex Williams of the New Stack here at DockerCon in Austin with Josh Bernstein. How are you, Josh?
I'm great. How are you, Alex?
Good. I really enjoyed your panel discussion at South by Southwest. You were on it.
Thank you.
You were on it.
That's right.
You were on. So, I wanted to chat here a little bit about DockerCon and open source and kind of this. I think we're really seeing kind of this realization of, much more higher profile, this kind of intersection between containers and Linux.
Yeah.
And you've been a technologist for a long time. I'm curious on.
It's a big title. Be careful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does that mean for you? I mean, what does that? What does this kind of event signify? Do you think for like enterprises and and your viewpoint on how open source is being really adopted in the enterprise?
That's a great question. I think that a lot of what we saw at South by Southwest, but really what we see here at DockerCon is there's a huge adoption of companies that have traditionally sold to enterprise shops that are really taking Docker and taking containers and taking Linux in the container very, very seriously. I never thought I would see the day that Microsoft would come out with an announcement that they're going to run Linux in a container.
Right.
Like, that's amazing.
Right.
I think when it comes to open source has really enabled this ecosystem. It's enabled this very rapid development of new ideas and new technologies and converged very, very quickly on something that turned out to be really useful. And we've seen this over the history of time with Linux. We've seen it with the kernel itself. We've seen it with the Apache web server. Now I think we're seeing it with containers themselves. And I think it represents, the next paradigm shift in sort of infrastructure technology moving forward.
Right. So there's a lot of enterprise. Presence here at DockerCon this year, much more so than last year.
Yeah.
And you guys have focused on code, by Dell EMC. What's the intersection there for you guys? Why are you here? Why does it make sense?
Well, we take the intersection of containers and open source and the enterprise very seriously. Code is not a new thing. We've been at this for several years now. And the goal with code is really to make Dell EMC relevant in these newer markets with these newer customers that are adopting open source and adopting this newer technology. And the way that you become relevant to them is you produce solutions and you produce projects, some of which we see behind us, that are relevant to them and are solving real problems. And it gives companies like Dell EMC a place in this discussion with these enterprise customers that have historically come to us for legacy infrastructure.
Right.
But now that we can talk about newer trends and containers and be relevant in that way, and we can do it through open source, I think it's a very powerful story for everybody.
Right. So these are, we are looking at some of the open source projects that you have. Can you take us through a few of them just for people to get
Sure.
an idea, like what you're doing in this space?
Yeah, so our biggest project is RexRay, which does storage orchestration specifically for containers. This is a project that's been around for 2 years now, over 2 years. And it's something we felt really filled a void. When containers came out, people talked about DevOps and 12-factor and how, we don't need storage. But yet the top Docker applications, the top applications on Docker Hub all required some level of persistence. So we wanted to enable that for people. We wanted to be able to run containerized applications, but run them to store data. And RexRay does all the orchestration underneath that. And we're very proud of that. And it's sort of an interesting thing for us that it's been 2 years in the making, and now we see all these other storage vendors here talking about containerized applications and persistence, and we kind of feel like we've led that charge and have done a great job with that.
What does that say to you and from your perspective about the overall story as it relates to how do you treat distributed infrastructure, right? If you're creating, this open source project around storage, you also have to start thinking about databases, for example,
Sure.
right? And how do you think about distributed databases, because there's a storage angle there, right?
That's right. At some point, the data has to be stored. The thing about containers is that because they're so reusable and can be launched so quickly, you have to have a way to bring the storage to the application. I think older paradigms in data storage was bringing the compute and bringing the application to the storage. This was the Hadoop model for many years. But I think with containers, the idea is that you treat the infrastructure as a commodity. It can come and go as you like, and the application can be easily rescheduled and relaunched wherever it sees fit. And this is a great paradigm. The trouble is that now you have to be able to bring the storage to the container, to the compute.
Right.
And if you can do that logically, if you can do that in an orchestrated manner,
right,
there's even more reason to run databases in containers and even more reason to move towards a containerized model, and that's really what we're after here.
Right. So, taking that, into consideration, this model that you're talking about, where are enterprises with it? Are you starting to see it being tested inside companies? Are they starting to dedicate resources to these kinds of storage problems and storage issues?
Yeah, I think there's a spectrum here. There are some customers that are still very early on, but the customers that have been iterating on containers for a while now have gotten to the point where, it's not just a Hello World app that we want to run in a container. We want to run Oracle, or we want to run a database, or Cassandra, or Spark, or something like that. And they come around to this storage problem and realize that there are, that RexRay and some of the projects and some of the work that we've done provides a really good solution for this.
Right.
With our release this week at DockerCon 0.9, we're adding a tremendous amount of enterprise capabilities to RexRay.
Right.
Security, encryption, token-based authentication, all these kinds of more enterprise features that we're helping these enterprises kind of adopt this container technology by checking these boxes that they're used to seeing.
Right.
And so it's just interesting to see how they're sort of like, oh, they've arrived at this juncture where we don't want to do Hello World anymore. We get the whole premise. Now we want to do real work, and now we need to store data, and that's where I think the project comes in.
Interesting. So with that in consideration, where do you guys go from here? What is what's the next generation of RexRay, for example? What are you guys looking at, moving forward?
That's a whole nother interview, Alex. In a perfect world, I think that a lot of the functionality that RexRay brings gets integrated into the storage platforms. That the storage features and the storage APIs that RexRay exposes gets integrated into Kubernetes and Mesosphere and Docker. And hopefully the server-side component of RexRay gets integrated into the storage providers. You'll be able to buy an array, or you'll be able to buy a product that has a containerized standard inside of it, that if Docker adopts and Mesosphere adopts and all these industries, or all the container runtimes adopt, the need for something like RexRay will simply go away, because it'll all be adopted by the ecosystem top and bottom.
Who's Rex, anyway?
Who's Rex?
Yeah.
Let's see. So we had the original product. The original project was called Dogged, and Dogged. If you really are after something like a bone, you really want to store something, you're Dogged. Well, that's kind of an odd word, so we went with Rex. And then the ray comes from this idea of an X-ray, and that's why if you see the stickers at the booth, he's running around holding an X-ray machine, and it's really about storage introspection. We want to be able to see and provide value to. Rex should know what the storage is capable of. Is it capable of snapshots? Is it capable of logical volumes? Is it capable of thin provisioning? It has to introspect the volumes. And so we took the two names, and it became RexRay. And we're working on a real live mascot for next DockerCon, but I don't know that.
Does RexRay have like a Scooby-Doo kind of a voice? RexRay, kind of something like that?
Maybe it does. You want to do the voice for the commercial next time?
RexRay. Okay, yeah, I think that'd be good.
You should do the voice.
Okay, great.
Good. Voice talent here, too.
Right. Yeah, all right. I try. Josh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for coming by. Cheers.
Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Makers at thenewstack.io/podcast. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.